topic is leadership. That's why, I think that's what the entire program is called, leadership, right? When people think leadership, people generally think business. People generally think success, money. But it's interesting because just because you're a bad leader doesn't mean that you're not going to make a lot of money or you're going to make a lot of money. Just because it's a good leader also doesn't mean you're going to make a lot of money or lack thereof. But leadership is not only important in business, it's actually important in every single aspect of your life. When you think, what does it mean to be a leader? Leader means that somebody that you're able to inspire, you're able to motivate, you're able to drive, you're able to influence. So the concept of a good leader, in order to motivate somebody, you have to be motivated yourself. That's step one. You also have to have the ability to provide that motivation to other people, but you have to be motivated yourself. If I were to come up here tonight, and I were to speak like this, in a very single monotone, and I'm going to try to inspire you to change, it might work for some. I think for the majority of you, I will put you to sleep. So I speak like this, and I change my pitch, and I try to go, because I'm motivated. I do what I believe, and this is what I believe. So I'm going to share with you some thoughts, some ideas from the personalities of the Torah on what does it mean to be a leader, what requirements, what traits can you have, and should you develop to be a successful leader. Now, as we said in the beginning, that in order to motivate, you need to be motivated. So if you want to go and you want to be a good leader, you first have to build in yourself qualities that are leadership-like qualities. It's not enough just to go and have a group of people and decide you're going to be their boss. It doesn't work that way. Leadership, you have to have, first of all, a group of people that want you to lead. You also have to have the ability to lead. So we're going to focus on tonight, B'ezrat Hashem, we're going to focus on the concept of you becoming someone who is worthy of a leader. What are those type of character traits? So we're looking at the Torah. What would you, if you were to think, who was to be in history of the Jewish nation, who is the greatest leader ever? Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu. So let's start speaking off with Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, let's start off giving you a little bit of history of who Moshe Rabbeinu was. Moshe Rabbeinu was born to two righteous people, Amram and Yocheved. And Moshe, when he was born, it was a very, very dark time for the Jewish people. They were in Egypt and they were slaves in Egypt. And not only were they slaves in Egypt, there was a decree that every single baby boy that is born is going to be thrown into the river. And unfortunately, this is what happened time and time and again. And he was born, he was a baby boy, but he was born 3 months early. The Egyptians kept very strict calculations, and they knew that in 9 months, this woman is going to be giving birth. But Moshe Rabbeinu was born when his mother was 6 months pregnant. So his mother and his father had 3 months with him, not knowing to the Egyptians that she gave birth. After the 3 months finished, they realized the Egyptians are not going to come. They're going to find Moshe Rabbeinu and they're going to throw him into the water. They're going to kill him. So what they decided to do is that they went and they put Moshe Rabbeinu in a basket, put it in the Nile River, and let it go. Figured at least this, maybe he has a chance of survival. Maybe he has a chance of something. And he goes and he's drifting in the water. And guess who sees him? Batya, the daughter of Paro, sees him. And she goes, long story short, she goes, she takes him, she falls in love with him, and she raises him as one of her own. And he goes, and he's now being brought and raised in Paro's palace. Paro teaches him, feeds him, everything. Everything is happening under the nose of Paro. Now, at about 17 or 18 years old, Moshe Rabbeinu was going and he's venturing out. He knew that he was a Jew, and he wanted to go see his brothers and sisters. So he's going out to the Jewish section where the Jewish people were slaves, and he notices something very shocking. He notices that there's an Egyptian beating a Jew to death. And Moshe Rabbeinu he's like, that's my brother. And the Torah says that he looks right, he looks left, and he goes and he saves this Jew, and the way that he saved this Jew is he had to murder this Egyptian. And he murdered this Egyptian. Word got out to Paro that his son, Moshe Rabbeinu, or his grandson, is the one that's living in his palace just killed an Egyptian. Paro was furious. He decided that Moshe Rabbeinu is going to die. He has a sentence of death. They capture Moshe Rabbeinu and they bring him in to his death sentence. And Moshe Rabbeinu, through some miraculous godly intervention, he was not only able to be saved from that death penalty, but he was also able to go and escape Egypt. Now, this other part is not so widely known to the majority of people. Where did he go after he escaped Egypt? He went to, where? before that. That's where everybody knows. No, people usually miss a step. He went to Cush. Cush is Ethiopia. He went to Ethiopia, and as he gets there, the king of Ethiopia was overthrown by somebody in his own government. The guy's name was Bilam. And the king was basically, he went out to war. When he came back, Bilam took over his entire government, his entire city, and he built a wall, a fortification around his entire country, so that the king would not be able to enter. And the king had still his army, and he tried, and they were fighting for years, for the king wanted to go and enter back into his country. At this stage, Moshe Rabbeinu comes in. And Moshe Rabbeinu comes in, and he goes into through ingenious intervention. He's able to go and figure out, it's not the story for tonight, so I'm not going to get into it, through poisonous snakes, and how is he going to get it with certain types of birds. Really a genius, a tactic. And he was able to go and get the king back into power. There was one problem with this. That by the time the king finally got back into the power, the king passed away. So now you have over here this, person that came from Egypt that sort of saved the entire kingdom. He really saved the entire kingdom. The king is dead. No one knows who's going to be king now. And they all decided, they see Moshe Rabbeinu was a wise person. He was somebody that was fit to be king, and they decided they're going to go and they're going to make him king. And this is where Moshe Rabbeinu becomes king of Ethiopia. And he's king of Ethiopia, and they give him the queen as his wife. He never consummated the marriage because this woman was still very involved in avodah zarah and idolatry, and he decided he doesn't want any part of that. For 40 years, he was king of Ethiopia. 40 years. And then suddenly, the queen had a child from the previous king, and the child now was older. And she decided that she wants her son to be the king. No more Moshe Rabbeinu. So she goes and she tells it to the people. The people are like, but we love Moshe Rabbeinu. He's great. He's so amazing. He's the best king. Like, we don't want to get rid of him. But at the same point in time, we have the queen saying this, and they didn't know what to do. Finally, Moshe Rabbeinu says, I'm going to step down. Says it's his rightful place, I'm going to step down. So 40 years of being king, he goes and he steps down from this throne. He goes and he travels, he leaves Ethiopia, and he travels to a place called Midian. Midian, this is where he meets Yitro. Yitro goes, hears about Moshe Rabbeinu, hears about the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu was running away from Paro. Yitro used to live, used to be an advisor to Paro, and Yitro decides that he's going to take Moshe Rabbeinu, he's going to throw him into prison, into his dungeon. And by the way, the prisons back then wasn't like the prisons now. I'm not saying that the prisons nowadays are good, but you basically put in a hole in a wall, and sometimes they fed you, sometimes they didn't. There was no heat, there was no medical, there was no television, there was no education, you couldn't get a degree there. And he got thrown into prison for 10 years. In fact, he got thrown into prison, and Yitro actually forgot about it. He forgot about the fact that he had a prisoner. Yitro had a daughter by the name of Tzipporah. And this daughter, felt bad for Moshe Rabbeinu. So she kept on slipping him some food. 10 years go by. 10 years go by, and suddenly the daughter of Yitro goes over to her father and says, Dad, father, says, what happened to that Egyptian that we have in the dungeon? So he's like, the Egyptian's like, oh my gosh, I completely forgot about that. And he's like, well, what could I do? It's been 10 years. So she's like, shouldn't we check on him? Maybe he's alive. Maybe, He's like, alive? He says, I didn't feed him for 10 years. There's no way that this person is alive. So she goes and she says, but listen, he's from the Hebrews. He's from the Jewish nation. We hear stories that their God does like some sort of like magic for them. The God takes care of them. Maybe miraculously he survived. So Yitro says, fine, let's go check. He goes and he finds that Moshe is alive and well. He was in the middle of actually praying to God. And when Moshe Rabbeinu finishes praying, Yitro's like baffled. He's like, I can't believe it. It's so miraculous. He was so like appalled by it. He's like, listen, you must be someone so amazing. There was another few things regarding a stick, whatever that was involved in the story. But long story short, Moshe gets out of prison, and not only that, he ends up marrying the daughter of Yitro, Tzipporah, the one who saved him. And then he gets into his father-in-law's business, right? Like any good Jew, gets into his father-in-law's business, and he goes and becomes a shepherd. And one day he's shepherding, if that's a word, right? He's, bringing the sheep to pasture, and suddenly he noticed there's one sheep that runs far ahead. And he sees a sheep running, so he chases after it. And he chases and chases after the sheep. Finally, he sees that the sheep goes to a pool of water, and he starts drinking. And Moshe Rabbeinu was like, wow. He's like, I neglected this sheep. He had, who knows, thousands of sheep. He's like, I neglected the sheep. He felt so bad. He says, the sheep had to run so far. I really should have taken care of the sheep. The sheep didn't have to go and travel so much. Look at what type of worker Moshe Rabbeinu was. And he felt so bad for this sheep that he decided that he's going to carry this sheep, an animal. He decided that he's going to carry this sheep back to the herd so the sheep doesn't have to walk. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God Almighty, goes and he sees this and he says, wow, if this is a person that goes and cares about an animal, imagine what he will do when he will care about people. He says, this is the person that I want to go and take out the Jewish nation. This is going to be the redeemer of the Jewish nation. He is going to be the ruler of the Jewish nation. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu went and he became, from where he was, all of a sudden he was the person that took people, the Jewish nation, out of Egypt. The most miraculous story in history. And the thing that you ask would be like, out of all his prerequisites, out of all his qualifications that Moshe Rabbeinu had, God chose the fact that he carried a sheep and he felt bad for a sheep. Let's look at a few of his qualifications. He was raised in Paro, in the highest elite Egyptian society, and not only was he raised there, he was also educated there. And he was, educated to be king. He had the education, the ability to do that. That God wasn't impressed by. Then he actually became king for 40 years in Ethiopia. But it's like, nah, we don't need that qualification. Out of all what did God decide that this leader is going to be the one that leads the Jewish nation out? Because he had compassion. He had empathy. He cared about something else. He wasn't even a being. He wasn't even human. He cared about another animal. He says, if this person can care, then this person can deal with my Jewish nation, with my children. You want to know the first lesson of being a leader? Empathy, caring. A good leader doesn't lead by dictatorship. A good leader, a good boss, knows each and every single one of his employees. Someone that leads, has an interaction, knows what their wants and their desires, and goes and guides them to growth. In order to do that, you have to care about that person. I want to share with you another personality in the Torah that also has this quality. Probably the second most influential Jew, Yosef HaTzadik. Yosef HaTzadik, whoever doesn't know, he ruled Egypt, second to the king, for 80 years. And not only that, he took Egypt from like here. He made Egypt great again, if we could say that, right? Like Egypt was like here, he took it like to a whole nother level. But he really did. And not only that, he made the Egyptian, the whole nation itself, they were the most wealthiest nation because of him. He brought money throughout the entire world through this famine and the starvation and the food that he put aside. He really put Egypt on the map like it was never done before. So how did Yosef get to where he got to? That's a success story. That's someone that goes from like nothing to like 100. That's someone you want to learn. You want to emulate. So let's look at Yosef. Yosef, he was born to Yaakov and Rachel. Now, Yaakov had 4 wives. He was one of the forefathers. He had 4 wives, and he really wanted to marry Rachel. Now, there was a whole trickaroo, whatever it was. He didn't end up marrying Rachel initially, but eventually he married Rachel. And he had the other 3 wives, all had children. Rachel did not have any children. Finally, after they all had children, finally Rachel had a child. That child was Yosef. So can you imagine, this is, her husband, the one that she wanted to marry. This is the love of his life. He loved all his wives, but this is one that he really went, and this is what his sole reason for going and working for Laban. This is what he wanted. And he goes and he marries this girl. He didn't have children with her for a long time, finally has a child. Imagine the love that he's going to give to this child. Forget about it, it's going to be his favorite. And it was. Yosef was Yaakov's favorite. And Yosef is, he has a loving mother, a loving father. Everything is going great. He's about 7 or 8 years old. He hears that his mother is pregnant. And he's so excited, like a 7-year-old, 8-year-old. Mommy's going to have another baby. Maybe it's going to be a boy. Maybe it's going to be a girl. Who knows? I'm going to have a brother. Excitement. 9 months go by. And this little 8-year-old boy hears something that no 8-year-old boy should ever hear. His father walks in, white as a ghost, and he says, Yosef, please sit down. And his father tells him, your mother didn't make it. Your mother passed away. His mother died in childbirth. And Yosef's entire life came crashing down. Can you imagine? This is his pillars of support. Gone. And Yosef's 7, 8 years old now. He's 8 years old, and he's slowly trying to climb out of this situation that he's in. 10 years go by. He has some dreams, things are happening. His father makes him a special coat. Everything is going well. Then one day his father goes over to him, Yaakov goes over to him and says, listen, go check where your brothers are. Your brothers were shepherding, they were shepherds also. Go check what's going on with them. So he says, fine, with pleasure. Kibud Avayim, honoring the parents. He goes and he travels to find his brothers. He goes and he finds his brothers. Now his brothers weren't so happy with him. His guy had dreams. They called him the dreamer. He was going to say that they were going to eventually bow down to him. They weren't so, on par with what he was saying, to the extent that they believed that he deserved the death penalty for what he has done. But they decided, out of the kindness of their hearts, and a certain, intervention of certain, brothers, they decided that they're going to go and they're going to sell him. So Yosef, he is 17 years old, he gets sold as a slave by his own brothers. Could you imagine the therapy bill that would be needed to fix such a situation? Being sold as a slave by your own brothers? So he goes and it's a good thing I don't have any things to throw. So he goes and I learned my lesson. I learned my lesson from last time. So he goes and he's carried away as a slave with a bunch of Arab merchants. And as he's traveling, he sort of like, smells something. He's like, oh, this actually smells really nice. Arab merchants usually, they usually deal with petroleum things, something that smells really bad. These particular kidnappers / slave dealers, whatever you want to call them, they had a nice little pine cone hanging from the caravan. And he was like, oh, this smells great. This is Yosef. Yosef is he's like, oh, must be good. And what did he pick from this? That God is sending him a message. God is taking care of him. This is Yosef's thought process. So he goes and he gets sold to Potiphar. He goes and he gets sold to Potiphar. Now, Potiphar, one thing I got to tell you about Yosef. Yosef was extremely, extremely handsome. Extremely handsome. And the person that he got sold to say it the nicest way possible, he played for the same team. He was married, but that wasn't his interest. And his wife was to be known as one of the most beautiful people, the woman also in the time. And when the wife saw Yosef, she became infatuated. She was like, wow, this is unbelievable. And for roughly about a year, she tries to seduce him. Day in and day out. She always changes her clothing. She always says, Yosef, how you doing? What's going on? Just get my nails done. She is really going and pulling all the strings. Yosef did not budge. He's like, no, what are you talking about? I can't do this. You're my master's wife. And she tries to convince him through astrology. She's like, look at the stars. It says that we're going to have a child. I'm not really married. He never consummated the wedding, the marriage with me. And she's giving him every single excuse in the book. This is an 18-year-old boy, got sold by his own brothers. He cares about what's right? How did he do that? He's like, no, I don't want to do it because what? Because something, like there's a God and God said it's not supposed to happen? God sold him, it made him go through who knows what in his life. But yet, he stood strong. He went and he persevered. And what happened? He keeps on fighting her off. He says, no, it's not going to happen. And day in and day out, and finally what happens is that she gets fed up and she somehow manipulates the system that she says that he tried to go and seduce me. And because, Paro and Potiphar heard about this, they threw him into prison. So here you have an 18-year-old boy who has done every single thing right, and what happened? Instead of getting rewarded, he got punished. He got thrown into prison. At this point, you'll think, fine, I'm done. All right? Forget about therapy. Bring me the drugs. Inject it directly into my eye. Like, that's what normal people you'll say this is what it goes at. There's nothing to talk about anymore. What are you going to go? Bring him to a rabbi and be like, really, there's a God and everything's for the best. And be like, really? When you're in my shoes, that's when you tell me that. Yosef could have had so many excuses, but he didn't. He held strong in his faith. And look what happened. He went into prison. You know how long he was in prison? For 12 years. 12 years he was in prison. You would think in prison, okay, fine, he's depressed, he's sitting in a hole, literally in a hole, like in a dungeon. Like, what is there to go, for in life? And Yosef wasn't like that. What was Yosef? Yosef was actually, he was like, he raised himself in the prison. He was like making sure, taking care of people. There were two people also in prison. There was Paro's baker and Paro's winemaker. And one day, Yosef wakes up and he sees the winemaker and the baker, they're sitting a little bit more depressed than usual. Right? They're in prison, obviously, right? But they're sitting more depressed than usual. So Yosef is like, hey, what's with the sad face? And they start telling him, oh, we had a dream. And they start telling him the story with the dream, and it didn't work out so well, and they didn't want to know the interpretation. He's like, listen, all the dreams come from God. Let me see, maybe I could help you. And he goes and he interprets a dream. Says, one of you guys is going to go out, one of you guys are not going to go out. Guess what happens? The dream comes true. Not only the dream, the interpretation that Yosef gave came true. Let's stop here for a second. How did Yosef do that? Yosef was going at the bottom. Not only was he not depressed himself, he was going there and he's like, well, you look down today in prison. You're like, how can I help you? Like, what's going on? All of a sudden, he had this compassion, this empathy for somebody else. Even when the things were going so tough for him, he was able to go and look at somebody else. And then what happened? The people came and they got the baker, well, one of them got saved, one of them got killed. The one that got saved goes over to Paro. 2 years go by, and Paro has a dream. And all of a sudden he's like, wait a minute, I know a dream interpreter. And he goes and he says, Yosef is a good dream interpreter. He interpreted me, and that's how I got here today. So because Yosef was able to go and interpret, like, go to this person in prison while he's in prison and sees that someone's suffering, even though he's suffering, and he was able to go and take care of him, what happened? Because of that, Paro went and took him out. Long story short, Yosef interprets a dream like nobody else could interpret. None of the Paro's dream interpreters would be able to interpret it the way that Yosef did. And Paro decided that you're obviously very wise, very smart, and he hired him to be the second in command. And Yosef stayed in that position for 80 years. So you look at it, what was one of the reasons that caused Yosef to succeed? He cared about somebody else. You want to know what it is to be a leader? And a leader means anything in life. A leader is in a house, a mother, a father, a sibling. Anybody leads. Everybody does. This is something that you constantly do. You want to know how to succeed? You have to start caring about somebody else. It's very hard in our day and age when we all care about us. All care about us, and we go and we scroll through social media and we try to find other pictures about us and what good thing people are saying about us and how many people like us and how many people heart us and how many people share us. All we care about me. We don't really care so much about anybody else. You want to succeed? Stop for a second. Look at other people. See what somebody else, maybe somebody else is troubling. Maybe somebody else is going something. Maybe you could lend just an ear. Be like, how's it going? Is everything okay? That's lesson number one. Lesson number one is compassion, empathy. Lesson number two. I'm going to give this with Avraham. Avraham, before Avraham was born, Avraham, the ruler at that time, his name was Nimrod. Nimrod had astrologers come over to Terach, which was Avraham's father, and the night before he was born, the astrologers saw in the stars that Terach's baby, which is going to be Avraham, he's going to be a mighty nation. He's going to be very, very powerful. And Terach was very nervous, and Nimrod, which was the king at that time, was very nervous about this. He says, oh, wait a minute, Abraham is going to be so successful, this little infant, and he goes over to Terach and he says, when the baby is born, you bring him over to my palace, to my castle. He says, we are going to have to end his life. And Terach he's like, listen, he's just a baby, you don't know. And he was not able to go and convince the king Nimrod to go and spare his son's life. So Terach was, this is his son. He wanted to save him. He somehow was able to go and get a servant. Some servant was able to give up their own son. Gave up their own son, which was also born on the same day that Avraham Avinu was born. They did the whole swap-a-roo. And Terach brings this slave baby to Nimrod. And Nimrod goes and physically kills this baby with his own hands. Now, Terach has a child, but he can't put the child in his house. So he hides the child in a cave. And here, Avraham is born, he's brought into this world, and this is how he's raised. And he goes and he starts looking at the world. And he was a very, very smart child. And he started thinking about God. He's like, maybe the sun is God. He's like, wait, but then the moon comes out and the sun's not there. And then he starts going and he says, maybe the mountains, he starts going, like, there's got to be some sort of power, some sort of being, some sort of ruler all over this beautiful earth. And he comes to the conclusion by himself that there is one God. And eventually, God reveals himself to him through prophecy. And we know after some time goes by, Avraham re-enters his house with Terach and his mother and his mother and father. And his father tries to, he tries to talk to his father and be like, hey, listen, his father was actually an idol worship dealer. Like idol worshiper dealer, idol dealer, whatever you want to call it. He would sell all the idols. So he had the Buddha, which didn't exist yet, but he had all these different types of idols. That was his business. And Avraham tried to convince his father. He says, this whole stuff is nonsense. It's fake. And the father wouldn't believe. He couldn't listen to him. And he had a store. So when Avraham went to the store, you see somebody going and they're looking at this idol and be like, wow, this is the idol for money, huh? And Avraham says, but listen, this is made out of stone. This is really not going to get you anything that you want. Be like, oh, well, this idol of love, right? He's like, yeah, but this is made out of wood. It's not going to really do anything. This is the worst salesman possible, right? He was like telling people not to go and buy any of the idols. He was saying there's one God. All this stuff is nonsense. It's garbage. So he goes and one day he decides he's going to put it into his own hand. His father tells him to watch the store. So he goes and he watches the store and he takes an axe and he watches every single idol as he bangs it and crumbles it and destroys it. And he leaves one, the massive idol. He lived one massive statue standing. And by the time, and he sticks an axe in the statue's arm. And his father comes in and he sees the entire store is demolished. It looks like they turned upside down. And he's like, Avraham, what's going on over here? What did you do? And Avraham says, well, no, it wasn't me. He says, you're not going to believe what happened. He says, I was just like sitting here minding my own business. And this big guy, this big idol, he takes an axe. And he was so upset that people worship other idols. And he went and he started destroying every single other idol. I couldn't believe it. And then he went back to statue mode. And his father's like, are you kidding me? He says, he can't do that. He's a statue. He's made out of wood. He's made out of stone. He can't do that. So Avraham says, why don't you listen to what your mouth is saying? He says, if he's made out of stone, then why are you praying to it? If he's made out of wood, then why do you go and associate any power to him? If he can't go and destroy his fellow idols, then he doesn't have any power whatsoever. Terach didn't listen to it. He got so upset, he ran over to Nimrod. He forgot about the fact that, the whole situation where he had to hide his son from Nimrod. Nimrod hears about this. Nimrod was a big idol worshiper, worshipped the fire. And he goes and he says to Nimrod, you know what happened? You know what my son did? He went and he destroyed all the idols. And Nimrod said, he did what? And he says, call him over here right now. And he goes in and he calls him in, and this Nimrod goes over to Avraham and says, Avraham, he says, you don't believe in any of the idols? You're going to serve an idol right here, right now. And he says, well, what idol are we going to serve? He says, you're going to serve the idol of fire. So he says, well, listen, fire, that's a good power. He says, but water takes out fire. So maybe we should serve water. So Nimrod is thinking about it, and he's like, well, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe we should serve water. And then Avraham goes over to Nimrod and says, but wait a minute, but the clouds carry the water, so maybe we should serve the clouds. So he says, yeah, you're right. Maybe we should serve the clouds. And he says, yeah. And then Avraham says, but wait a minute, but the air, the wind, blows the clouds. Maybe we should, worship the wind. And now Nimrod is scratching his head. He's like, wow, you're right. And then Avraham goes and says, well, wait a minute, but like a human being could just withstand the wind. So maybe we should work with the human. And this is where he took it like one step too far. He's like, okay, listen to me, all right? I don't know what you're doing with all these games and all these mind games. We're worshiping fire and you're worshiping it right now, Nimrod said. So Avraham says, it's not going to happen. And he went and he threw him into fire. He threw him into a furnace of fire. Now, you know what happened? Nothing. He didn't get burnt. Not even a hair got singed. And everybody's looking, and they see, Avraham gets thrown into this fire, and Avraham is just like strolling in the fire. He's like walking back and forth. Hey, what's going on, guys? It's a little hot in here. Let's turn down the heat a little bit. He was not burnt. For 3 days, they kept him in there. 3 days and 3 days. He was walking back and forth. He was relaxing. He's getting a suntan. In there. Getting the sauna, right? You guys Russian know that, right? That was his banya. He was going for 3 days. Finally, Nimrod's like, all right, if I see this not going out, why don't you come out, please? And he comes out, but now he gives Avraham some honor. He says, I see you have special whatever powers. And he goes and he honors Avraham. And not only that, he also gives Avraham 200 people to go along with him when he leaves. And one of those people was Eliezer, his faithful servant. That's where he got it, where he got Eliezer from. So Avraham goes and he leaves. Now, this is a traumatic experience for anybody, right? He was in fire for 3 days and 3 nights. Would you think it would be like, okay, listen, I did my job. I kind of passed a huge test. Now I'm just going to go retire. I'm going to relax. Are you going to go and start telling other people about God? He's like, last time I did that, I got thrown in the fire, right? Talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. He's like, I'm not going to talk about God anymore. I've done my share. Avraham didn't do that. He says, no. As soon as he got it, he started again going and telling people there's one God. He went and he started calling to everybody to say, listen, there's only one God, there's only one power, and there's only one being that you need to pray to and serve. He did not give up. He became the forefather of the Jewish nation. Talk about a leader. Talk about power. So you want to know the second lesson of leadership? You never give up. Not on yourself, and definitely not on anybody else. Now, let's look at another personality, and that is Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, very interesting with Rabbi Akiva. It's getting late, so I'm going to try to make this a little bit short, this segment. Rabbi Akiva, he was a single parent. At the age of 40, he was a divorced father. And he was a secular person, did not believe in God. And at about 40 years old, he's working for this very wealthy individual, Jew, Kal Basavua. And his daughter, Rachel, of Kal Basavua, goes and sees him and says, she saw that he was very bright shepherd. He says, if you would go and you would put your mind to learning Torah, then I will go and marry you. And he's like, listen, I'm 40 years old. I have a son and, like a single dad. He's like, I can't do it. It's not going to happen. And he's walking. And then we know the famous story. He's walking and he sees water that's dripping on a rock. Now, a rock is a very hard object. I'm sure you all know that. The water was dripping on the rock, and the water was making a hole inside the rock. And Rabbi Akiva goes and says, wait a minute. He says, if water can go and make an impression on a rock, can make a hole in a rock, then the Holy Torah for sure can make an impression on my heart. And he says, you know what? Fine, I'm going to go learn. And he decided that he's going to go and he's going to change his life and he's going to go learn Torah. Rabbi Akiva and Rachel, they get married. And Rabbi Akiva, by the way, when the wealthy father heard that her daughter married behind his back, this shepherd, this ignorant shepherd at this time, he disowned her. Says, you're not getting anything. You're not getting a cent from me. And they were living in dire poverty. And Rabbi Akiva did not give up. He started learning. He was 40 years old. He was a tall man, 40 years old. He started learning with the kindergarten. He couldn't get a private tutor. He started learning for the little children. After he learned the alphabet, he learned the ABCs. He went to learn sentences and he kept on learning and learning and learning. Until one day he goes and he feels like he learned. He decided he's going to go out and he's going to go learn with the big rabbis throughout the land of Israel. And he goes and he leaves. And his wife, with his wife's permission, and actually she pushed him to go, he leaves for 12 years. 12 years he didn't come home. After 12 years, he's sitting and learning day and night, like nonstop. He decides he's got to go home. He comes home and he overhears his wife talking to a neighbor, and this neighbor is saying, "What, your husband was gone for 12 years? Like, how do you do? Like, why? Like, why are you living like that?" And she's like, "If he were to hear me, I would tell him to go back for another 12 years." He heard it, turned around, went back for another 12 years. When he came, the first 12 years he came, he did not only that he learned, he became a rabbi. Not only he became a rabbi, he had 12,000 students. And that's not followers on his Instagram page. He had real students that had real connections to them. 12,000. He left for another 12 years. He came back after 24 years away from home with 24,000 of the most genius minds in the Jewish nation. They were not only students, they were big rabbis. 24,000. Now what happened to these 24,000? There was an epidemic. From the period of Pesach to Shavuot, all 24,000 of his students died. You think Rabbi Akiva, wow, 24,000? Like he's working so hard for this, and all of a sudden this is what happened. He says, like, hey God, I get the point. I'm going to go on the 8th hole, practice this thing. I don't know why people do that, right? Practice my golf swing. Retire. But he didn't. His entire life working, crashing down. And he was an older man at this time. And you know what he decided to do? Start again. And he took 5 more students. One of those 5, all these 5 students became huge rabbis. One of those 5 students is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who wrote the Zohar. What do we learn from Rabbi Akiva? What do we learn about Avraham Avinu? You never, ever give up. You don't give up on your employee. You don't give up on your friend. You don't give up on your spouse. You definitely don't give up on yourself. Because you want to inspire people, you have to be motivated here. You have to have the drive, the ability to influence. If you're dead in here, nobody wants to be motivated by a dead person. You need to fix yourself. You need to fix who you are. I want to finish off with one final thought. There's a story that I heard from Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein. Some of you have heard this story from me before. There was once a king, and he had a single son. And this son was being educated to be the next king. So he went through all the highest end schooling and education. And he goes and he reaches to the age of 21, graduating with honors from everything. And finally, before the final graduation, that he finally, is ready to become king, the father of the king goes to him and says, listen, we're going to do one final test. And says, sure, Dad, what is it? And he gives him a bag of $100,000. And he says, what are we going to do with this? And the father says, you learned a lot of techniques, you learned a lot about business, you learned about money, you learned about a lot of things. Let's put it into practice. Here's money. Don't come back to this castle, to this palace, until you make me more money. Go. And he sends his son with the entourage out to go make more money. So the prince goes, fine. He starts traveling. He goes into the marketplace, and he's thinking, what am I going to do to make money? Real estate is too slow. I need something quick. I want to go home. So he decides what he's going to do is he's going to buy an item, some sort of item worth of value, and he's going to go somewhere else and sell it for more. So he's going and he's walking down the marketplace, and he sees in the corner of his eye a very fancy jewelry store. He says, wow, that's perfect. I'll buy a nice piece of jewelry. I'll go somewhere else. I'll sell it for more. I'll go home. So he goes into this jewelry store. He's looking around. Suddenly notices in the top right corner, like behind this beautiful glass, case, he sees this huge diamond. It's like sparkling in all directions. Couldn't even look straight at it. And he goes over to the store owner. He's like, what is that? And the store owner's like, oh, this diamond is so rare. It's so, it's so unbelievable. There's no such diamond like this in the world. And he's like, I want that diamond. How much is that diamond? And the owner goes and tells him, he says, listen, this diamond, it's really not for sale. But for you, as a good businessman, right, as every Jew, it's like, really not for sale, but for you, I'll make a deal. He says, for you, $100,000. He's like, that's exactly the amount of money I have. Wrap it up, I'm taking it. He slams down the money, and the owner goes and he wraps up this big diamond. Meanwhile, this guy gets a tap on his shoulder. He turns around, doesn't see anybody there. He's so excited he's getting his diamond. Then he gets another tap. Turns around, and he looks back down, sees an old man hunched over his walker. 2 tennis balls on the bottom, before tennis balls came out. Right, he's sitting over there, hunched over, and he's looking up at him. And he says, old man, can I help you? And he says, I see you just purchased this diamond like on a whim. Do you know anything about diamonds? And he says, what do you mean? Why do I need to know anything about diamonds? Look how shiny it is. He's like, it's for sure. I for sure could get more money with it somewhere else. So the old man said, listen, I'm just saying that maybe you should take it to a specialist, evaluate its worth. Maybe it's worth more, and you're right, you will make money, but maybe it's worth less, and you're going to lose money. And he says, you know what? You're right. I should take it to a specialist. And he says, but I don't know anybody that's a specialist in diamonds. And he goes over to this old man, do you by any chance know anybody who's a specialist? And he says, yeah, I happen to know somebody. So he goes over to the store owner, he puts a deposit down and says, I want to take it for evaluation. Well, the store owner says, B'chava, take, enjoy. He takes this diamond, and he's walking with this old man. And as he's walking, he sees that the streets are getting dirtier, are getting smaller, it's getting dingier, it looks like in a bad neighborhood. He's like, where are you taking me? And he's like, it's a little bit more. This guy knows everything about diamonds. Just trust me. He'll take care of you. They're getting closer, and the only building in front of them was a prison. He's like, where are you going? He's like, listen, my dear prince, don't be angry with me. He says, he happens to be locked up, but trust me, he knows what he's talking about. And he says, you take me to a criminal? He's like, you know what, I'm here already, fine, let's see what he says. He goes over, he walks into the prison, and he goes into this prisoner. And this king opens up the diamond from the pouch. He shows him to the prisoner and says, listen, apparently you know about diamonds. Apparently you know a lot about this. Tell me, what's its worth? And the prisoner is looking at it from one angle to another. He's like studying it without touching it. And then he's like, it's a fake. And the prince like, what? He says, how can you tell it's a fake just by looking? He's like, there's no way. Look how beautiful this is. And the prisoner sticks his hand through the bars and just tips the diamond. And the diamond, in slow motion, fumbles to the floor. And in slow motion, it shatters to 1,000 pieces. And the prince is like, are you kidding me? He says, this was going to be my ticket back home. How dare you do this? I'm going to have your head. And the prisoner's like, whoa, 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 my dear prince, relax for a second. A diamond doesn't break. A diamond is a very strong substance. This is made from glass. You're getting gypped. You're getting sketched. And the prince was like, wait a minute, you're right. He says, I am. And he gets so upset. He goes and he gathers the dust of this diamond, all the things. He brings it back to the store. He slams it back and says, what type of business are you running over here? You're sketching the prince? Really? And the guy's like, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Please, here's your money back, full refund. Please don't do it. And the prince is like, listen, I'm going to keep an eye on you. He says, you better shape up over here. And the prince goes and he starts traveling. He says, now he's got still 100 grand. He says, what am I going to do? How am I going to go and make money? He keeps on walking and walking. Finally, he sees a racehorse salesman. And he's like thinking about it. He's like, wait a minute, racehorse, that you can make some good money with racehorses. Like maybe I buy a nice, powerful horse, make some money with the races. So he goes in, he starts looking around, sees one horse. I mean, they're nice, they're strong, they're big, nothing caught his eye. Then he sees like a horse in the corner, chewing on like iron, muscles bulging from like all directions, muscles that he didn't even know existed on there. And he was like, whoa. He's like, is that even a horse? He's like, what is that beast? And he's looking around this animal, and the owner comes in, and he's like, wow, I see, you got my prized possession over here. This horse is unbelievable. Just look at the muscles that he has. I was like, I see it. And he's like, you're interested in buying a horse? And he's like, yeah, actually I am. He says, how much is this one? And he says, for you, 100 grand. He says, 100 grand? He says, I think I can make money with this. You know what? Package it up, whatever they do with horses, I don't know, saddle it up, I'm taking it. And he's running the paperwork. All of a sudden, the prince gets another tap on his shoulder. He turns around. It's the old man. This time he lost his teeth. He's sitting over there looking at him. And he's like, hey, how's it going, old man? What's going on? He says, you see this? I'm going to win all the races. And the old man says, do you know anything about horses? And he says, what's there to know? Just look at it. This thing is going to eat people alive. There's nothing, nobody can beat this horse. And he says, maybe you should take it to a specialist. And the prince starts thinking, he says, you know what? He says, you've done me right before with the diamond. Yeah, let's take it to a specialist. And he goes, and this old man starts bringing him to this part of town. And it gets smaller and smaller and dirtier and dirtier. And as he's like, the prince is like, wait a minute. Are we going back to prison? And the guy's like, yeah, but trust me. I'm like, do you know anybody not in prison? Like, what's going on? Like, all your people that you know are in prison? He's like, trust me, this guy that I know knows about horses. He's like, you know what? You've done me right before. Let's go. He brings it in to the same person. He's like, you got to be kidding me. Diamonds and horses, this guy? And he's like, yeah, just trust me. Check him out. So he goes, fine. He goes and he takes this guy out of the prison to go and look at this horse. And this guy is looking around, walking around this horse. He's like shaking his head. He's like, wow, this is a beast. This is crazy. And then suddenly he goes and he stares at the horse's eyes. And he's just like looking into the horse's eyes. And suddenly he says, the horse is crazy. Don't buy it. And the prince starts laughing. He's like, you just told me that it's so powerful. And now you look into its eyes and it's all of a sudden, it's crazy. He says, all of a sudden, what are you, the horse whisperer? You know how to look into the soul? And the prisoner goes and says, you don't believe me? Go find someone on death row. Only on death row, let him ride the horse. So he said, fine. They found someone on death row and they put him on the horse. The horse, and then they do the little hiya, whatever it's called, right? And the horse takes off like no one's business. You can't even see the legs. It's just like, 0 to 60 in 2 point whatever seconds. I don't know 3 seconds, whatever it is, right? This guy is going. The horse reaches about 100 yards, and all of a sudden the horse starts acting like a bull, starts trying to throw off its rider. And finally the rider just like flies off. Then the horse looks for the rider, and with the back horse kick, started kicking this horse. This horse started kicking this guy. And not only that, when this guy was broken, this horse went and started biting this guy. By the time the rescue team came, they went and this guy was beyond dead. His bones were pulverized. 2 minutes, I'm done. So he goes and he tells over to this poor man. He says, wow. He says, you're right, this horse is crazy. You really saved me. He says, how could I have, it's unbelievable. It's like, you just saved me from the worst mistake. And they say their goodbyes and the prince walks away. The prince is walking, he starts thinking, he's like, wait a minute, this prisoner is really smart. Something's going on with this prisoner. So he says, you know what? He walks back into the prison. He walks back to this prison. He says, listen, I see that you're very smart. Why don't you tell me something about myself? He says, you're obviously, I'm curious, Can you tell me something that I don't know? And the prisoner goes and says, I really don't want to play this game. It's like, I'd rather not. And he says, no, I want you, please, go ahead, entertain. Just tell me something that I don't know. And the prisoner goes and he says, please, don't make me. And the prince says, listen, what, are you nervous about something? I'll give you immunity. No matter what you say, you're not going to get in trouble for it. And he says, you promise? He says, I promise. And he says, fine. And the prisoner looks at him. And he goes over to this guy, and he says, this prince, and he says, you're adopted. And the prince is like, what? No way, not adopted. What? And then his mind starts thinking, he's like, wait a minute, I am the most handsome in my family. I am the smartest. Maybe I am adopted. You have people, think about this all the time. It's like, wait, maybe I am adopted. No, I'm not adopted. And he's going back and forth, and he's like, you're crazy. He's like, and he leaves. But in his mind, he's like, there's no way I'm adopted. 3 steps later, I'm for sure adopted. And he couldn't withhold himself. He decided he's making a beeline right back to the palace. He goes right back to the palace. And he goes in right to his mother. No knocking, barges right in. And his mother sees him and says, wow, you made money already so fast. Baruch Hashem, Baruch Haba, thank you for coming back. How much money did you make? Doesn't say a word. He says, Mom, am I adopted? And the mother just stares at him, turns white. Her teeth start shaking. And she starts mumbling. And he's like, Mom, Mommy, Mama, come on. It's like, am I adopted? No, he turns white. And the mother's like, let's go talk to your father. And he's like, whoa, Mom, wait, what do you mean? And they both start walking to the father. The mother just barges in. The father was in a large meeting with all his advisors. She comes in. She's like, everybody out. When a woman comes into the room and says, everybody out, everybody goes out. And everybody's out. And she's going. And she walks up to the husband. And she couldn't even say anything. And the son goes over to the prince. Is like, Dad, am I adopted? And now the king gets very serious. And he says, who told that to you? He's like, wait a minute, Dad, answer my question. Am I adopted or not? And the king said, where did you get this information from? And now the prince is starting to raise his voice. He says, Dad, am I adopted? So the king says, please sit down. Let me tell you a story. And he says, when you were about a few weeks old, we were at war with another country. And we demolished it. And as me and my closest advisor were traveling through the ruins, we heard a little muffled cry from one of the tents. And we go in and we see it was a newborn baby. You were just born. And we're looking, it was just me and the advisor. And, you know, me and your mother, he goes and he tells him, he says, we weren't able to have children. And we knew, the doctor says we wouldn't be able to have children. He says, here we found the newborn baby. We said, you know what, let's raise this child as our own. And I swore the only people that knew that you were adopted is me, your mother, and that advisor. And that advisor died a few months later. And he swore to me that he didn't tell anybody. Now I'm going to ask you the question one more time. Where did you get this information from? And he says, there was a prisoner in prison that told me about this. The king's like, bring this prisoner right here, right now. And they rush and they bring the prisoner. And the prisoner is screaming, immunity, I was promised immunity. I was promised that nothing's going to happen to me. And the prince goes over to his father and says, look, Dad, if I can call you that, he says, I promised him immunity. I told him, the king says, fine, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm not gonna do anything to you, but I have to know who told you this. Who told you that he's adopted? So the prisoner goes and he says, it was very simple. Your son came over to me for advice. And I helped him. I saved him a lot of money. Didn't do anything. Your son came to me a second time for advice. And I saved him, again, a lot of money. And he didn't do anything. And he said, who's somebody who comes from royalty knows how to pay their debts. If you do something for someone who from royalty family, they will do something for you. He never once came and says, you saved me twice, what could I do for you? He never once asked what he can pay me, what he can say, what he can do for me after all that I've done for him. Somebody like that does not come from royal blood. Somebody like that has to be adopted. We are the Jewish nation. We come from royalty. If you don't have the basic concept of gratitude, hakarat tov, then you have to look deep inside to see if you're really a Jew. That's how powerful. You know what it is to be a leader? A powerful leader is that when someone does something for you, you know how to say thank you. You know how to pay your debts. You know how to pay back. You know how to go and appreciate when someone has done something for you. But you want to know what the most ultimate being that you have to appreciate too? That's God. God has given you life. God has given you health. God has given you money. God has given you everything that you have in your life. Nachmanides tells us one of the reasons that we're here on this earth is to realize that there is a God and to thank God. Now don't answer this question, but think about it. When was the last time that you told God thank you? When was the last time that you went and you said, you know what, God, you've done so much for me. What can I do? Let me pay back. God already gave you the answer. There's 613 commandments for every single Jew. You want to be someone that's successful, you have to first start building in yourself. If you cannot be grateful to the creator of all, and especially your creator, then there's no way that you can be grateful to anybody else. True gratitude means that you're grateful from all angles. You want to know what it means to be a Jew? You want to know what it means to be a leader? You have to have gratitude. So the three things that we spoke about is compassion. Feel for somebody else. You want to be a good leader? Feel for somebody else. Have some empathy. Number 2, never give up. Never give up. Not on your coworkers, not on your spouse, not on your friends, not on your children, and especially not you. And for the final thing, the final factor, arguably probably one of the most important ones, know how to have gratitude. Know how to be thankful. And most importantly, know how to be thankful to the Creator who has given you everything. Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm sorry that it took so long.